Hello, my name is Youngmin Park. I am currently a postdoc at Brandeis University, and today I will talk to you about attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, my experience with it, and some of the science behind it. I was born in Korea and spent the first 5 years of my life in Swaziland, which is now called Eswatini. My dad was a diplomat and worked closely with South African and Swazi officials. We were relatively well off, and the few memories I have of this time are very positive. Both pictures here are of my sister and I, the left in 1990 and the right in 96. She's in fact now a successful lawyer. On the right, we're posing in front of an exhibit at a zoo in Australia. And I remember because in addition to seeing kangaroos, joeys, and emus, I saw a koala fall out of a tree. Even though it fell on solid concrete, it immediately ran back up the tree to safety and everything was fine. Around the time this picture was taken, my parents divorced. No one told me what was happening. Slowly, my mother came home less and less until one day she told me it would be our last day together. This experience had a significant impact on my mental health that still affects me to this day. Combined with untreated attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, or ADHD, I struggled for a long time to find myself. And it's only now, at the age of 32, I understand and accept who I am. No one suspected I had ADHD. It didn't help that Korean culture severely downplayed mental health problems. It also didn't help that even though I was disruptive and extremely energetic, I could occasionally focus intensely for many hours on end. And this is hyperfocus, in fact, a common symptom of ADHD. And if you have ADHD, you know exactly what this feels like. When I was a toddler, I would play with my toys literally all night long, forgetting to eat and sleep. My Lego collection was a huge part of that. Anytime my parents told me dinner was ready, I'd cry out of frustration because I didn't want to stop playing. And the problem continued as I grew older and started playing video games. In my generation, we had Counter-Strike Source. You guys have Counter-Strike Go. I also played a lot of other first-person shooters, and in fact still do, and I play lots of Apex Legends. It wasn't just games, though. I had hobbies that I pursued on and off, but with burning passion whenever I did. And these are examples of drawings that I made in 2006 when I was a junior in high school. And these were for a coloring book for a girlfriend at the time that I really liked, so I tried really hard with these drawings. And I also was part of a band, and we played for hours and hours in this makeshift recording studio in a friend's basement, and that was great fun. All the while, I was never a good student. I don't ever remember being able to focus in school at any time from first grade through grad school. However, since I could focus on things I liked outside of school, it clearly meant I was just lazy. Clearly, I had to learn how to focus. This woman is like my spirit animal. This is exactly what I look like even today when I'm trying to think of new things, when I'm trying to study something. But a few years later in college, so after high school, as I started college, I decided to do something about my focus problems. And I chose the major that most directly confronted my weaknesses. I majored in applied math with a focus on neuroscience. And math problems and research require immense patience, sustained focus, and careful logical thinking. These were all things I did not have and tried to develop through sheer brute force. And these are just equations that I studied as part of a research project when I was an undergrad. So it's a model of a neuron. Happy to answer more questions about that later. But I always doubted my intelligence, being surrounded by all the time by so many smart people, but I always knew that I could rely on my work ethic. And so I worked hard to try and fix my brain. This process led me to earning a master's in applied math, a PhD in math at the University of Pittsburgh, and a postdoc at one of the top auditory neuroscience labs at the University of Pennsylvania. And this is a model that I worked on. It reproduced a lot of different brain responses in response to different auditory sound stimuli. Again, happy to answer questions about that. But while I still had trouble with my memory, still couldn't really focus, and still struggled to believe I even belonged in academia, I learned to think like a scientist. And as far as self-doubt goes, I'm sure many of you know exactly what that feels like. And in fact, I've since learned that even very accomplished people can feel insecure about their abilities. And now we arrive at the present day. Recently, I was diagnosed with ADHD. It came as a complete surprise, and I absolutely did not believe the diagnosis. I was told my entire life that I was lazy and needed to fix it. How could it be that I have a disorder? So I decided to learn more about ADHD. And it turns out that the name is incredibly misleading. So it's not just an attention disorder, nor does it always make people look hyperactive. So let's ignore the name for the moment and look at what it actually is. It's a disorder of the frontal lobe of the brain. The frontal lobe is like a command center and controls things like impulse, attention, and motivation. In someone with ADHD, to put it bluntly, it's as if the frontal lobe has some kind of damage. It's harder for them to focus, to control their emotions, and maybe even control their spending. As I learned more about ADHD, I learned that this diagnosis happened to explain every major issue I struggled with since I could remember. And of course, that made me very happy, but I'm trained to think like a scientist. I also wanted to understand how researchers proved that ADHD brains are different. So let's put on our scientist hats and turn to a classic study from 1990 by a man named Alan Zemetkin and his colleagues. In this study, they gathered a group of people with ADHD and a group of people without. And in either case, with all people, they performed a simple memory task, which looks like the following. First, they're presented with 3 tone beeps. So da, 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 and they're told to remember the lowest note, the lowest frequency of those beeps. So in this case, we would think number 3. They remember this tone for a few seconds, and then they submit the answer and repeat for however many trials are required. So very simple design, easy to remember, hard to mess up. And during this task, the scientists measured the brain activity of all people. And this is what they found. This is an image, or this is a cartoon of the brain, and the squares show brain scans, the regions where they took brain scans. The specific details of how they did that are a little different, but effectively, for all intents and purposes, you can just think of these as being brain scans. And what they found are these regions that are special, black regions. And these correspond to regions that had significantly lower activity in ADHD brains compared to brains without ADHD. This is a significant finding because if you, like many other scientists at the time, hypothesized that the frontal lobe is responsible for ADHD, then this result is consistent with that hypothesis. So this is how scientists found strong evidence for the connection between the frontal lobe and ADHD. This is also a very extremely well-designed study for reasons I won't go into, but this paper essentially established that ADHD is real. So since then, there have been hundreds of papers on this topic, and it's an extremely well-established disorder, and it's absolutely not laziness. So after learning about the science behind ADHD, my entire mindset about myself has changed. I no longer fight against my brain, but work to implement coping strategies to help my brain work as well as it can, given that I have ADHD. I accept my brain for being different. With that said, I hope this talk was helpful, and I'll leave you with some pictures of Sky. I helped raise her for about 6 months as the fun uncle. Unfortunately, she does not live with me anymore. She has her parents out in New Jersey. I miss her every day, but thank you all for your attention.